Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session that will overview the street interchange application. My name is Debbie Sasko, and I'm the AVP of Information Services at IANA, and I also have Stacy Fagan here, who is one of our program managers that will be helping me today. The purpose of the session today is to walk motor carriers through the frequently performed functions within the street interchange application. So to get started, we're going to first walk through a brief PowerPoint presentation that I have, and then after that we'll go into the actual application and take a more detailed look at the specific functionalities. The street interchange application is a web portal that facilitates EP-approved motor carrier to motor carrier street interchanges as well as street turns when a move is changing from an import move to an export move. EPs and motor carriers can access the street interchange application once logged into their UIIA account, or they can go directly to the URL www.streetinterchange.com. This service is offered at a no-cost value-added benefit to UIIA participants. So as part of your UIIA participation, the use of the street interchange application is available to you at no cost. Motor carriers that are interested in using the application are immediately set up within the street app in regards to the main UIIA contact. That actual individual will be the contact within the street interchange application. So if you want to change that, you would need to go into the street interchange application and go to the Method of Communications tab and change your contact information there. Motor carriers can also set up secondary users to access the street interchange application. Once inside the UIIA app, you would take whatever secondary users you have there will appear within the street interchange application, and then you can set permissions within the street interchange application for those secondary users as to whether you want them to have the ability to do any type of actions within the street interchange application on your company's behalf. Communication methods offered within the street interchange application for UIIA motor carriers, they default to email. Like I indicated, it would be the email address of the main UIIA contact. We also offer additional methods of communication either via EDI, XML, and we also have an API web service that's available for companies if they're interested. If you're interested in any of those other alternative methods of communication, you can just contact our office and we'll be happy to walk you through and get you set up for that. Benefits of the application. Originally, the UIIA agreement did not have any language that allowed for an actual street interchange or a street turn to take place under the UIIA terms and conditions. So the Intermodal Interchange Executive Committee that oversees the UIIA agreement got together and formed a working group and approved language to become effective in the UIIA. And once that language was effective, the next step was to create this web portal that is now what you see as the street interchange application. So what the application does is it allows for an efficient way for motor carriers and equipment providers to facilitate and expedite street interchange and street turn transactions between those parties. It automatically validates for a street interchange when there's two motor carriers involved. It validates whether that second motor carrier has a valid interchange under the UIIA for the specific equipment provider that's involved in the street interchange transaction. And the most important thing, it captures an electronic record of the transfer of liability, damage, and indemnification terms and conditions that are set forth under the UIIA between the parties. So when the street interchange occurs between two motor carriers, it captures a record when the terms of the agreement go from motor carrier A to motor carrier B for the use of that equipment. And for a street turn, when only one motor carrier is involved, it identifies when that move went from an import move to an export move. It also allows for better utilization of equipment on both the equipment provider side as well as for the drivers on the motor carrier side. It allows for them to save mileage and fuel when they can use the equipment better for purposes more than just taking back an empty. The application also provides supporting documentation that can be used should you have a dispute, whether it be involved per diem, maintenance and repair. That electronic record captured in the system will allow you to prove when that exchange occurred, when it went from motor carrier A to motor carrier B, or when it went from an import to an export move. And it allows the free time and per diem to be allocated properly based on the terms and conditions in the UIIA equipment provider's addenda. Some enhancements we've made to the street interchange application since it's been in effect We added a new street turn functionality when we first launched the application. The street turns and street interchanges were all done on the same web screen. We got feedback from users that for a street turn, you did not require as many pieces of information in order to transact that type of transaction. So what we did is we made a screen specifically for street turns that populates a lot of that information for the motor carrier and only requires you to complete specific fields like the container number, the equipment provider that's involved in the transaction. So it automates that and hopefully expedites that type of transaction within the application. We also added the ability for motor carriers to be able to edit, cancel, or reinitiate a transaction. So once you submit your request, after that submission, if you determine that maybe you entered the wrong booking number or you no longer want that transaction to move forward, while it's pending, you have the ability to go in and edit and cancel it. Once it's approved, then you cannot do so. I do want to let you know that we had a call with UIIA equipment providers yesterday that are using the system, and one of the features that they asked for was the ability to be able to edit and cancel an approved transaction. So we are looking at the feasibility of that. We won't know whether we'll be able to do that until we take a deeper look at it, but that's one of the items that's on their list of enhancements that they would like to see. The reinitiate functionality is basically if a transaction is rejected by a party or if a pending transaction is canceled by a motor carrier, you can go back and bring that transaction back up in the system and actually hit the reinitiate button. What that does, it brings back up all the information you had previously entered for that transaction, so it saves you from having to rekey all that. And then you would just need to change whatever information is different before you make the submission. So it just saves you a little time in regards to submitting a transaction. Multiple containers under a single request. We also had added a functionality where on the street turn screen, a motor carrier can submit multiple containers under the one request. And then what the street interchange application does is if you say you enter 3 containers under the one request, it then takes that request and makes 3 individual requests out of it when it sends it to the equipment provider for approval. And for the maintenance within the application, it would show as 3 different transactions. But for the motor carrier, when they're submitting it, it would only be all done on one screen. And the last item is the time frame for a transaction to stay in a pending mode. Originally, when the application was first launched, one of the feedback items that we got from the beta testers was that, at least from the motor carrier community, was that there needed to be a finite time frame for that transaction to be approved because it needed to occur quickly. So what we ended on based on feedback was this 24-hour clock. For this particular modification, what we did is we modified that if a transaction was submitted on a Friday after 2 p.m., that 24-hour clock then does not start until the following Monday morning at 7 a.m. because that allows for those types of transactions that are submitted late on a Friday not to be rejected over the weekend. It gives everybody another 24 hours starting at 7 a.m. on Monday to take action on that transaction. The next slide here just shows the equipment providers that are currently using the street interchange application, which are Med Shipping, Hapag-Lloyd, Hyundai, and then Yang Ming and recently Evergreen is also using the application now, and both Yang Ming and Evergreen are using it on a regional basis. Yang Ming's using it in the New York, New Jersey area, and Evergreen is using it in the LA and Long Beach area. So hopefully those 2 equipment providers will elect to expand that use to other regions, but for right now they're keeping it within those specific regions as far as the use goes. So with that, what I'd like to do now is take you into the application and we can take a deeper dive on some of these functionalities. So if you bear with me, let me just log into the application. I'm going to log in as a motor carrier first, and this is a test account that I'm going to be using. But as you can see here, when you log into the street interchange application, you're taken to a dashboard for that particular company that's logged in. You're going to see if you have any secondary users, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes, as well as how many requests that have been submitted into the available equipment pool that's available in the application, as well as your status information, how many approved transactions, canceled, pending, rejected, and then your year-to-date total of the transactions that have been submitted by your company through the application. You'll have a list here, and this list is expanded, but in the production system, you would have a list here with those 5 equipment providers that I had just mentioned on the PowerPoint slide, which would be Med Shipping, Hapag-Lloyd, Hyundai, Yang Ming, and Evergreen, would be listed here as the equipment providers that are currently using the system. So with that, let's take a look at the first button at the top, are your secondary users. This secondary user list is generated from your UIIA account. So if your company has secondary users under your UIIA account, they would be shown on this screen here. And then you would be able to set or modify permissions for those specific users to have within the Street Interchange app. So if you had 10 secondary users and you only wanted 5 of them to have the ability to do anything within the Street Interchange app, you would simply set their permissions. So you can either set a permission for the secondary user to just be able to initiate interchanges, or that individual can be set to initiate and approve interchanges. And if you wanted to do the change, you would simply check the box, click Set or Modify Permissions, and then click OK. And at that point, this individual would be able to then initiate and approve transactions for your company within the Street Interchange application. They'd have their own login. They would log in with their credentials that they were provided when they were set up as a secondary user under the UIIA. So they'd use their username and password from the UIIA application in order to access the Street Interchange application if they're going directly to the Street Interchange URL, which is www.streetinterchange.com. They also have the ability, again, to access it through the actual UIIA application. There's a link on the lower left-hand side for IANA Street Interchange app that they could use to access it as well. The second link at the top here is the method of communication, and it's going to ask a question as to whether you as the master user want to receive a copy of the notification if the request is initiated by a secondary user. We had some motor carriers that had requested that if a secondary user from their company was the party that initiated the request, they didn't want to receive notice of it. They wanted that party to receive the notice, whoever initiated the request to receive it. So if you don't want to receive notification and you're the master UIIA account user and you don't want to receive notification if one of your secondary users submits something through the Street Interchange system, you're going to go in here and you're going to click No here. And that will stop you from receiving any type of email notifications when a secondary user of your account does something within the Street Interchange. If you want to receive those notifications, you simply click the Yes button. Again, it will ask you how you want to receive information. Do you want to receive it via EDI, XML, or email? This, again, default to email and to the email address that we have on file for the UIIA master user. If you want to change that, you would simply come to the screen and enter the new email address that you would like to receive these types of notifications for your company. And when I say notifications, you'll get notified when you initiate a street turn or a street interchange request. You'll also get notified when the EP approves that request. And then a final notification will get sent to you if it's a street interchange transaction when all parties have approved it, because in a street interchange, again, you have 2 motor carriers versus just 1. A street turn, once the EP approves it, it's then approved in the system. So you'll get 2 notifications on a street turn. Going to the next button at the top, this is your notification of available equipment. So if you have a piece of equipment that you would like to street turn or street interchange and you want to make that available and let other motor carriers be able to see that that equipment is available, you would simply go in here on this screen and fill in the actual information that you would want. So you'd key in the equipment provider's name, your company's name is going to populate along with their SCAT code. You'd select what type of load it is, the container type, container size. If you have the chassis number, you would provide it. If you don't, then it's going to default to this ZZZ with 6 nines for indicating that's a motor carrier provided chassis. So for this one, let's go ahead and put a chassis in here just so that you can see it. And then we'll go down here and select the type of chassis, the chassis size, and if it's a genset, you can put the genset number in. For the equipment location, that's where the equipment is right now. So if you can enter the first few digits of the zip code of where you're at, our IANA location code list will be displayed where you can select a location from this list. If your location is not on this list, This is a free-form field, so you can fill in the address information here of where you're located. The original location for the available equipment pool works the same way, where you put in the first few digits of the zip code, and you can select the location if it's there, or it's free-form if it's not. This is only for the available pool of equipment fields. We go to next. Let me put the container number in and click next. It's going to give you a confirmation screen and ask you to confirm the information that you've entered. If you say yes or confirm here and then OK. And then if you went to the available search for equipment available for interchange, that unit is going to show up here at the top. So you have the ability, or whoever would have the ability, to see that this equipment is available for street interchange purposes, and that party could initiate a street interchange right from this button, or you, as the party that entered this into the available pool, would have the ability to delete it if you would want to delete it. If we go to the notification of available equipment report, this allows you to search for a piece of equipment and then download that information in an Excel file. So this would give you the information in an Excel file of all the equipment in the available pool. Field preference search. This allows you to set how you want your Excel file to be displayed. So you have all the fields that are available, and you can move them over to this available field side, and then you can pick and choose. So say I didn't want the equipment location, I can click on that and move it back over to this side. And then when I look at my Excel file, it's only going to have the fields that I have listed here, and it's going to have them in the order that I have them listed here. So if you wanted to move up the order, you could simply click the up and down arrows and move the fields around. And that will be how the information is displayed when you do a search and then download that information in an Excel file. The search for available equipment for interchange, we've already looked at that. The next field here at the top is how you submit a street interchange when it involves two motor carriers. You would enter the SCAT code of the equipment provider, motor carrier A's SCAT code, motor carrier B, and again, the type of interchange, the container size. The bill of lading is not a mandatory field, but the export booking number is. The container number. If the chassis number, if you have it, fine, you can provide it. If you don't, then if you leave it blank, it's going to insert these 4 Z's and 6 9. So we'll leave this one blank. For the equipment location, again, you can use our location code table by keying in the first few digits of the zip code of the location, or if you wish, you can freeform enter the actual location of where the equipment is located currently. For the original interchange location, that is limited to the locations that the equipment providers have identified as their original interchange points. So for this, you can do the drop down with the zip code, or if you're looking for a specific location, you can put in the first few letters of the location and it will display the ones that are there, or instead of doing that, you can simply click on this location code list and then again enter the location name or the contact information here, and it'll bring up those locations that are in the system. And then it'll pre-populate once you select that information here. This is limited based on the equipment provider's request because they were getting locations that were not actual locations, they're interchange locations, so that's why they have limited the locations that can be selected from here. If you find that a location for an equipment provider is not listed on the list when you look at it, then please contact our office and we can contact the equipment provider to have that location added for you. This is all based on IANA's location code table, which we use for many of our applications. So it's a standardized table that we've developed that has a code associated with each location. So once you fill in that information, you click Next. Your confirmation screen will come up. You can edit if you want to edit. If you've made a mistake somewhere and you need to edit that, you click the Edit button and you can fix whatever fields you need to fix. Or you can simply click the Confirm button and OK, and then that transaction will then show under your pending transactions. And the equipment provider and motor carrier A, since I'm motor carrier B entering the actual transaction, would be notified that a street interchange had been submitted through the application. So now that particular transaction is waiting for the equipment provider to take some type of action, either by rejecting it or approving it. If you, as the motor carrier, would want to make a change to that, Because it's still in a pending status, you would be able to do that. So here's the transaction that I just put in. So if I go to that, you can see that it's waiting for the equipment provider now to take action on it. But say I decide, well, I don't want to do this transaction any longer. I can cancel the request, and if I do that, I can simply click cancel and click OK. It's going to show that the transaction was canceled by my SCAC code, and that way if someone goes into the system, they'll see that Hyundai as the motor carrier and AllZone as motor carrier A would be notified that the transaction had been canceled. Now, say the next day, that same motor carrier says, well, now I want to reinitiate that transaction. So what they could do is come in here and just click the reinitiate request. It's going to pre-populate all the information you previously had in there. So if you don't need to change anything, then you don't need to add any information. You can simply click next and confirm, and then that transaction would be reinitiated for you. And then again, the involved parties would be notified, and it would go from there. So if you go back on that particular transaction and go to your pending screen, you'll see that that transaction is back there again, and now it's again waiting for Hyundai to approve it. So that all can happen. A cancellation, an edit, or a reinitiation can happen to a transaction that is still pending, except the reinitiation. The reinitiation can take place on a transaction that's been rejected or canceled. So that is that functionality for street interchange involving two motor carriers. So then you have a button here that allows you to search for street interchanges. So you have all the fields at the top here that you can search from. You can search by request type. So say you only wanted to search for street turns versus street interchanges that involve two motor carriers. You can click that button and it'll bring back just the street turn transactions for you. Or you can search by container number or any of these fields that you have here. The last button at the top here is the quick street turn transaction button, and this allows you, it pre-populates your company information in. It will require that you key the equipment provider's information in, so it'll pre-populate their name after it will allow you to select that from the drop-down. You'll enter the container number, the export booking number, and the bill of lading is not mandatory. You'll have to do the location, so if I select the location here, and then say I want to add another container to the same request, so I don't have to do a second request. I can just click that add button, add another container, put the export booking number, and then select the location for BNSF, click next, and confirm, and yes. And then those two transactions would now be showing under your pending information. So here's the two that I just added right here. They're shown shaded because they're not waiting for this motor carrier to take any action on them. Right now they're waiting for Hyundai to take action. So if I go back to the home page here, you can see we've covered all of the buttons at the top. There's also a link here for the quick street turn. You can access your secondary users here that we talked about. This just shows you your available equipment requests that you've added to this available pool of equipment if you've added any. And then down here you can see your approved transactions. So any of these transactions that have been approved, if you wanted to look at them, you would just click the go button, and then it's going to show you the record of what happened to that particular transaction prior to it being approved and once it was approved. So it'll give you the date and the time of when the approvals occurred by each of the entities. And you also can download that information in a PDF if you needed to use it for a dispute of charges or anything like that. It'll allow you to do that. It'll also allow you to reinitiate this request. If you want to reinitiate this with all the same information and then edit it, you can do that as well for a new request. Then if we go back to the home page and you look at your cancels, you can do the same thing. This one's canceled, so if I wanted to reinitiate this, I could. Here, it would pre-populate all this information, and then I would just simply change anything that I needed to change. The same would happen with your rejected transactions. So if you click go here, again, it shows why it was rejected. Now, on any of the rejected transactions, it will show a reason if a motor carrier or the equipment provider has rejected it. They have to include a reason. So that will be shown in this box. And that's another item that the equipment providers we talked to yesterday had indicated that they thought would be helpful if there was a remark field when any of the transactions were submitted that was available to everyone, so that when you as a motor carrier would transmit or initiate a request for a street interchange or a street turn, that you'd have a remarks field that if you wanted to put any type of remarks for the equipment provider to see, you'd be able to enter those in that field. So we go back to the home page and we'll look at the pending transactions, and you can see right now that all of the ones that are shaded are ones that are waiting for another party to this transaction to take an action on the particular transaction. But this one at the top is waiting for this particular motor carrier. So as you can see, this one was actually initiated by the equipment provider, it was approved, and now it's waiting for the motor carrier to approve that transaction. So they're going to indicate whether there were any issues with the unit, and if there were no issues, then they would click approved, none here, and then approved, and then it would approve the transaction, and then you can see that there's an approval there. What I'd like to do is log in as an equipment provider so that you can see their side of it as well. So here's the equipment provider, Hyundai, as a test case. So if I'm looking here, I see that there's a street interchange transaction here waiting for me to take action on. So I'm going to look at the transaction. I can either reject it or approve it. So let me say I'm going to approve this transaction. You can see then it turns that box green showing that Hyundai approved it. Now it's going to send an email to this motor carrier in this street interchange transaction, and it's going to ask them, let them know that there's a transaction out there waiting for them to approve. So if I close this out and log in as that motor carrier, if I go to my pendings, you'll see that transaction sitting at the top. So I know that it's waiting for me to do something. And again, I'm going to find out if there's anything that's going to ask me to do my Exhibit A inspection. If there's something wrong with the equipment, you would note that. And if that's the case, then motor carrier A is going to be notified, and they have to agree to what you've noted before the transaction is approved. If there's nothing wrong with the equipment and you click none, then once you click approved here, it'll show that the transaction has been approved, and all parties will have been notified that the street interchange has been completed and the equipment has gone from motor carrier A, which was all zone, to motor carrier B, which was IANA Intermodal. So there'll be a record in the system that reflects that at that date and time. If I go back to my pending transactions, let me log in as a equipment provider again so you can see a street turn. So if I go back to the pending, I can see here's a street turn transaction that's waiting for the equipment provider to approve or reject. So say I want to reject this transaction, it tells me I have to provide a reason. So the equipment provider would have to put some type of reason in here, and then click the reject button and say yes. And at that point, it's going to show it's rejected, and you as the motor carrier will be notified that the EP rejected that transaction. Going back to the pending transactions for that particular equipment provider, here's one that is a street turn. So you can see it's waiting for the equipment provider to approve it. Once they approve it, you can see the street turn is approved, and then the motor carrier would be notified that the street turn had been approved. So basically, those are the functions of the application itself. Stacy, do we have any questions?
We do have a couple.
Okay.
Can Canadian motor carriers use the app?
Yes, they may. The only thing that we may have an issue with is if the equipment provider has not provided the originating location for that Canadian location. If it's a Canadian location, we would have to make sure that that Canadian location was listed in the originating interchange points for that particular equipment provider. But there's nothing to preclude a Canadian carrier from using the system.
Another question is, it seems to take a long time to get street turn approval. Is there anything IANA can do to work with the EPs on getting approval quicker?
What I would need to do is, I think we have who submitted that question, correct, Stacy?
Yes.
So what we can do is we can get back to you directly. We need to find out what particular equipment provider, if it's a specific equipment provider you're having that problem with, or if it's just an overall problem. That was one of the items that was raised yesterday in regards to that 24-hour clock for the rejection period with the equipment providers. And, I stressed to them when I was on the phone with the equipment providers yesterday that, the motor carrier community wanted to make sure that these transactions took place in a quick response time period. Of the equipment providers that were on the call, all of them indicated that they were approving them in a quick manner. But if you're having problems with a specific provider, because they actually wanted to shorten that rejection period. So if you're having a problem with a particular provider, I'll get with you after the call, and then we'll contact that provider and talk to them to see if there's an issue. Any others, Stace?
Just some quick feedback. Whenever we get a rejection, the reason seems to be cut off, so can you look into the PDF formatting?
Yes, we will do that.
That's it.
Thank you for your time this afternoon, and have a good day.